What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy meets daytime television's most outspoken host? Well, you're about to find out. And trust me, this confrontation makes Rocky's fights look like playground scuffles. Sylvester Stallone walked into the View studio expecting a typical promotional interview. But what he got instead was an ambush that would leave producers scrambling and security rushing to intervene. Joy Behar had her claws out from the moment Stallone sat down. And what started as professional pleasantries quickly devolved into the most explosive television moment in recent memory. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me which celebrity you think would hold their own against Joy Behar in a heated debate. The morning air in Manhattan was crisp. As Sylvester Stallone's black SUV pulled up to the ABC studios, the 77-year-old action star stepped out wearing his signature leather jacket, looking every bit the Hollywood icon he had become over 5 decades in the business. His publicist, a sharp-suited woman named Rebecca, walked alongside him as they made their way through the backstage corridors. "Remember, Sly? This is supposed to be a light interview about your new documentary," Rebecca reminded him, checking her phone for the 100th time that morning. "They want to talk about your journey, your struggles, maybe touch on the new projects. Keep it positive. Keep it simple." Stallone nodded, adjusting his jacket. Yeah, I got it. These morning shows are usually pretty straightforward. How hard can it be? If only he had known what Joy Behar had planned for him. In the green room, Stallone settled into a comfortable chair, accepting a cup of coffee from a production assistant. The familiar sounds of live television filtered through the walls. The audience applause, the upbeat music, the cheerful banter between hosts. It was the kind of environment he had navigated hundreds of times throughout his career. Mr. Stallone, a young producer, appeared at the door, clipboard in hand and headset around her neck. "We're ready for you in about 5 minutes. Joy specifically requested to handle the interview segment with you today." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Just Joy, not the whole panel?" "That's what she requested," the producer confirmed before hurrying away. To handle other pre-show tasks, something about that didn't sit right with Rebecca. But before she could voice her concerns, another production assistant was escorting Stallone toward the studio floor. The familiar rush of live television energy hit him as he walked onto the brightly lit set, waving to the enthusiastic audience who erupted in applause at the sight of the legendary actor. Joy Behar sat at the curved desk, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp and calculating. She wore a black blazer that seemed to match her mood, and as Stallone approached, she offered him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sylvester Stallone, everybody," Joy announced to the audience, gesturing for him to take the guest chair position directly across from her. "Thank you so much for joining us today." "Thanks for having me, Joy," Stallone replied, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of someone who had done this dance 1,000 times before. "Great to be here." The audience was still buzzing with excitement, and Stallone fed off their energy, flashing his famous crooked smile and giving a small wave. He was in his element, ready to charm his way through another promotional appearance. So Joy began leaning forward slightly. "You have this new documentary coming out about your life and career. Must be nice to control the narrative for once." "Right." The comment had an edge to it that made Stallone pause for just a moment. "Well, I wouldn't say it's about controlling anything. It's just telling my story honestly. You know, the ups, the downs. The whole journey, Joy repeated, her voice taking on a slightly mocking tone. "That's interesting because your journey has been pretty controversial, hasn't it?" Stallone's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the direction he had expected the interview to take. "I'm not sure what you mean by controversial." Joy shuffled some papers on her desk, a theatrical gesture that suggested she had done her homework. "Well, let's start with your early career. You struggled for years, couldn't get work, lived in your car. At one point, some might say you were just another failed actor trying to make it in Hollywood." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the warm, celebratory tone they had expected for a visit from such a beloved star. "I prefer to think of it as persistence," Stallone replied, his voice remaining steady despite the unexpected hostility. "Yeah, I struggled. Most actors do. That's part of the business. But then you wrote Rocky." Joy continued, her tone becoming more aggressive, "and suddenly you're this overnight success story. Except that movie, when you really look at it, it's pretty problematic, isn't it?" Stallone blinked, genuinely confused. "Problematic? How so?" Joy leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was causing. "Well, it's the story of a white guy who gets a shot at the title against a black champion, and the way Apollo Creed is portrayed, all flashy and arrogant, while Rocky is the humble, hard-working everyman. It plays into some pretty ugly stereotypes, don't you think?" The studio fell silent except for the hum of the cameras and the distant sounds of the control room. Stallone's jaw tightened, and for the first time since sitting down, he looked genuinely angry. "Now wait just a minute," he said, his voice taking on the growly quality that had made him famous. "That's completely unfair, and you know it. Creed wasn't a stereotype. He was a complex character, and Carl Weathers, who played him, became one of my closest friends. We worked together to create something meaningful. Did you, though? Joy pressed, clearly not interested in backing down. Or did you just tap into America's racial anxieties and package them as an underdog story? The accusation hung in the air, like a toxic cloud. Stallone's hands gripped the arms of his chair, and his famous temper, the one that had gotten him into trouble throughout his career, began to surface. "You're way out of line here, Joy," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Rocky was about hope, about believing in yourself when nobody else does. It had nothing to do with race. "Everything has to do with race in America," Joy shot back. "And successful white men like you have a responsibility to acknowledge that successful white men like me." Stallone repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Lady, I grew up poor in Hell's Kitchen. My father left when I was a kid. I know what struggle looks like." Joy waved dismissively. "Doe, please spare me the sob story. You've been privileged your entire career. You've made millions playing the same character over and over again. The tough guy, the hero, and now you want sympathy because you had a hard childhood." The audience was growing visibly uncomfortable. Some were whispering among themselves, others were checking their phones, and a few had the deer-in-headlights look of people witnessing a car crash in real time. Stallone stood up from his chair, towering over the desk where Joy sat. "You know what? I didn't come here to be lectured by someone who's never created anything in her life except controversy." Joy's eyes lit up with malicious glee. She had gotten exactly the reaction she was looking for. "Oh, so now the tough guy is going to intimidate me. How very stereotypically masculine of you." "Intimidate you?" Stallone laughed bitterly. "Lady, I'm just standing up. But if that scares you, maybe you shouldn't pick fights with people twice your size." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators were glancing nervously at each other, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. In the control room, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to go to commercial or let the confrontation play out. Joy, however, was just getting started. She had clearly planned this ambush carefully, and she wasn't about to let Stallone off the hook now that she had him exactly where she wanted him. "Let's talk about your politics," Joy continued, completely ignoring Stallone's growing anger. "You've been pretty vocal about your conservative views over the years. Don't you think that's hypocritical for someone who made his fortune playing working-class heroes?" Stallone sat back down, but his posture remained tense and defensive. "My politics are my business. And last I checked, working-class people are allowed to have different political opinions." "Are they, though?" Joy challenged, leaning forward with predatory intensity. "When you support policies that hurt the very people you claim to represent in your movies. When you live in a mansion in Beverly Hills and complain about taxes while playing characters who struggle to pay rent. You don't know anything about what I support or why I support it." Stallone replied, his voice getting harder with each word. "And you certainly don't know anything about my life or where I came from." Joy shuffled through her papers again, pulling out what appeared to be a printed article. "Actually, I know quite a bit. I know you've donated money to politicians who oppose union rights. Isn't that interesting considering Rocky was all about the underdog fighting against the system?" "Rocky was fiction," Stallone said through gritted teeth, "and my charitable donations and political contributions are nobody's business but mine." "Everything is the public's business when you're a public figure," Joy shot back, "especially when you're being hypocritical. You've made hundreds of millions of dollars playing tough guys and war heroes. But what did you actually do when your country called? Did you serve in Vietnam?" The question hit like a slap across the face. Stallone's complexion reened and his hands clenched into fists on the armrests of his chair. The audience collectively held its breath, sensing that Joy had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. "That's completely inappropriate," Stallone said, his voice barely controlled. "My military service, or lack thereof, is not something you get to judge me on." "Why not?" Joy pressed, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was causing. "You've made a career out of playing soldiers and patriots. Don't the American people have a right to know whether their action heroes actually walk the walk?" "I had a medical deferment," Stallone said quietly, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "I had complications from my birth that affected my ability to serve. But that's personal information that I never should have to defend to someone like you." Joy waved dismissively. "Oh, the old medical deferment excuse. How convenient. I'm sure it had nothing to do with not wanting to risk your pretty face in a war zone." That was the final straw. Stallone shot up from his chair again, this time leaning over the desk toward Joy, his face flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about, lady. None whatsoever. Sit down," Joy commanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. "You're on my show, and you'll conduct yourself appropriately." "Your show?" Stallone laughed bitterly. "This isn't journalism. This is a hit job. You invited me here under false pretenses just so you could take cheap shots." Joy's expression grew even more smug. "I invited you here to ask the questions that other interviewers are too stoic to ask." Someone needs to hold celebrities accountable for their actions and their words. Accountable for what, exactly? Stallone demanded. For entertaining millions of people, for creating characters that inspire hope, for working my ass off to build a career from nothing. That's a D. Accountable for perpetuating toxic masculinity. Joy replied without missing a beat. For glorifying violence in your movies, for promoting outdated gender roles. Your films have done real damage to how men see themselves and how they treat women. The accusation was so outrageous that Stallone actually laughed out loud, but it was a harsh, angry sound. Are you serious right now? My movies promote toxic masculinity. Have you actually watched any of them? I've seen enough. Joy said, dismissively. Rocky, Rambo, the Expendables, they're all the same. Men solving problems with their fists, treating women as prizes to be won or objects to be protected. It's prehistoric thinking. Those characters face impossible odds and never give up. Stallone countered, his voice rising. They protect innocent people and fight for what's right. If that's toxic to you, then maybe the problem isn't with my movies. Joy leaned back in her chair, clearly relishing the confrontation. So, you don't see any problem with teaching young men that violence is the answer to their problems. I see a problem with people like you twisting everything into something ugly. Stallone replied, my characters don't start fights, they finish them. There's a difference between aggression and defending yourself. Is that what you're doing right now? Joy asked, with mock innocence. Defending yourself. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having a tantrum because someone finally called you out on your nonsense. The insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that even the audience audibly gasped. Several people in the front row were shaking their heads in disapproval, clearly uncomfortable with Joy's behavior. Stallone took a deep breath, visibly trying to control his temper. You know what, Joy? I've been in this business for 50 years. I've dealt with critics. I've dealt with bad reviews. I've dealt with people who didn't like my work. But what you're doing here isn't criticism. It's character assassination. I'm doing my job, Joy replied coldly, which is asking the tough questions that need to be asked. Your job is supposed to be entertaining people and maybe informing them. Stallone shot back, not ambushing guests with personal attacks disguised as journalism. Joy's smile grew wider and more predatory. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you expect me to just fawn over you like every other interviewer? Did you think you could come on here and get softball questions about your latest project? I expected basic human decency, Stallone replied, but clearly that was too much to ask. Human decency, Joy repeated mockingly. That's rich coming from someone who spent decades glorifying violence and making money off America's gun culture. Now you're just making things up, Stallone said, his patience finally exhausted. I've never glorified gun culture. My characters use weapons when they have to protect innocent people, right? And I'm sure that has nothing to do with the millions of dollars you've made from action movie merchandising. Joy replied sarcastically. Toy guns, video games, all marketing violence to children. Stallone stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working as he struggled to find words for what he was feeling. You are unbelievable, you really are. You sit here in your comfortable chair making your comfortable living by tearing down people better than you, and you think that makes you some kind of crusader for justice. People better than me. Joy laughed harshly. You mean richer than me, more famous than me, but better. I don't think so. I mean, people who actually create something. Stallone replied, people who put themselves out there, who take risks, who try to make something meaningful instead of just sitting on the sidelines throwing stones. Joy's expression darkened. She had been enjoying the verbal sparring, but Stallone's comment had clearly hit a nerve. I've been in this business longer than you have, pal. I've earned my place at this table. By doing what exactly? Stallone challenged. By being controversial, by saying outrageous things for attention. That's not earning anything. That's just being a professional troublemaker. The studio fell silent except for the uncomfortable shifting of the audience and the barely audible whispers of the production crew. Joy's face had gone pale with anger, and for the first time since the interview began, she seemed to be at a loss for words. You don't get to talk to me like that, she finally said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. Not on my show. Then maybe you shouldn't have started this. Stallone replied calmly. You wanted to fight Joy. Well, congratulations, you got one. Joy's composure was cracking, and everyone in the studio could see it. Her carefully planned ambush was backfiring. Spectacularly, Stallone refused to be intimidated by her tactics. She gripped her note cards tighter, her knuckles white with tension. You think you're so tough, she said, her voice shaking slightly with anger. But you're just another aging action star trying to stay relevant. When was the last time you made a movie that actually mattered? Stallone laughed, but there was no humor in it. When was the last time you said anything on television that actually helped someone? All you do is spread negativity and division. I speak truth to power. Joy snapped back. Something you wouldn't understand since you've been surrounded by yes-men and sycophants your entire career. Truth to power. Stallone shook his head in disbelief. Lady, you're not speaking truth to anything. You're just being cruel for the sake of being cruel. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being a bully. Joy's face flushed red with indignation. I am not a bully. I'm a journalist doing my job. You're about as much of a journalist as I am a ballerina, Stallone replied. Real journalists ask hard questions to get to the truth. You ask loaded questions to get a reaction. It's cheap, it's lazy, and frankly, it's beneath even you. The insult landed like a physical blow. Joy's mouth opened and closed several times as she struggled to formulate a response. Around the studio, production assistants were frantically whispering into their headsets, clearly receiving instructions from the control room about how to handle the rapidly deteriorating situation. How dare you? Joy finally managed to say. How dare you come on my show and insult me? I'm not insulting you, Stallone replied calmly. I'm describing your behavior. There's a difference, although I'm not sure you're capable of understanding it. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward from the force. That's it. I don't have to sit here and listen to this from some washed-up actor who thinks he's still relevant. Washed up, Stallone's eyebrows rose. Is that the best you can do? After all that build-up, all those personal attacks, you're going with washed up. I've got to say, Joy, I expected better from someone with your reputation for being nasty. The audience was now openly murmuring among themselves, with many looking shocked and uncomfortable. Several people were recording the confrontation on their phones, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing television history in the making. Security, Joy called out, her voice cracking slightly. I want him removed from the studio. Stallone remained seated, completely calm, despite the chaos erupting around him. Really? You're going to have me thrown out because I wouldn't let you bully me? That's your solution. What? Two security guards appeared at the edge of the set, looking uncertain about what they were supposed to do. They glanced back and forth between Joy and Stallone, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they had been thrust into. Remove him, Joy repeated, pointing at Stallone with a shaking finger. He's being disruptive and hostile. One of the security guards, a middle-aged man with a kind face, approached Stallone cautiously. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Stallone looked up at the guard and smiled sadly. Sure thing, officer. I understand you're just doing your job. He stood up slowly, straightening his leather jacket with dignity intact. Unlike some people in this room, Joy was practically vibrating with rage. Get him out of here now. You know what's really sad about this whole thing, Joy? Stallone said as he began walking toward the exit, flanked by the uncomfortable security guards. He had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's lived an interesting life, who's overcome real obstacles, who's created characters that have inspired millions of people around the world. Instead, you chose to be petty and mean-spirited. Don't lecture me, Joy shouted after him. You don't know anything about me or what I've accomplished. Stallone stopped walking and turned back to face her one last time. You're right. I don't know much about you, but I know what I've seen here today, and it's not pretty. You're a bitter, angry person who gets satisfaction from tearing other people down. That's not journalism. That's not activism. That's just sad. The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Joy's face had gone from red to almost purple with rage, and she was gripping the edge of her desk so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. You're nobody, she screamed after him, completely losing any pretense of professional composure. You're a has-been who got lucky with one movie 40 years ago. Stallone paused at the edge of the set and looked back at her with something that might have been pity. And yet, here you are, so threatened by this nobody that you had to ambush him on national television. What does that say about you? The question landed with devastating effect. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Around the studio, the audience sat in stunned silence, many of them looking embarrassed to be associated with what they had just witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, Stallone said, addressing the audience directly for the first time since the confrontation began. I want to apologize to all of you for what you've had to sit through today. You came here expecting to be entertained, maybe learn something interesting, and instead, you got to watch someone have a public meltdown. That's not your fault, and it's not fair to you. The audience began to applaud slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm, several people stood up. Then more, until nearly the entire studio audience was giving Stallone a standing ovation as he walked toward the exit. Joy watched in horror as her own audience turned against her, applauding the man she had just tried to humiliate. Sit down, she commanded. But her voice was lost in the noise of the continuing applause. Stop clapping, she shouted, but the audience ignored her completely. If anything, the applause grew louder and more enthusiastic. As Stallone reached the studio door, he turned back one final time and gave the audience a small wave and that crooked smile that had made him famous. The applause reached a crescendo and someone in the back of the audience actually shouted, "We love you, Rocky." Joy was left standing alone at her desk, surrounded by empty chairs and the sound of applause for her departed guest. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of her humiliation as she stood there, speechless and defeated. The architect of her own downfall, the security guard who had escorted Stallone out, returned to the set and approached Joy cautiously. "Ma'am, the producers want to know if you're ready to continue with the show." Joy looked around the studio, taking in the still applauding audience, the uncomfortable expressions on the faces of the production crew, and the reality of what she had just done to herself and her show. For the first time in years, Joy Behar was completely and utterly speechless. Cut to commercial. She finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause. Just cut to commercial. And with that, one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history came to an end, leaving Joy Behar to face the consequences of her own cruelty, while Sylvester Stallone walked out with his dignity intact and the respect of everyone who witnessed his grace under pressure. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity handle themselves better under such unfair treatment? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Which talk show host do you think would be the most difficult for a celebrity to deal